Have you ever wondered why they wanted Jesus dead? Like why they wanted to get him? One of the reasons why the Pharisees at least wanted to get him was that they were anticipating somebody very different than him. If God was going to come into the world, they were expecting a king, someone with grandeur, power, influence, somebody who was not crowned in thorns, but rather one that was crowned in gold. And that's not what they got. The king that they got wasn't crowned in gold, but rather thorns. And so on the solemnity of Christ the King, which is one of my favorite feast days, I realize that I have been meditating on something for an awful long time. Personally, I have been meditating on something that I want to tell you that has granted me a whole lot of peace. Now, it may be hard to say, and I may have to explain myself, and it may make you just a little uncomfortable, but I definitely think it needs to be said. And I will define my words, don't get me wrong. But I proclaim to you today that Christendom is finally dead. And to that I say good riddance. A part of it needed to die. You may ask me, Father, what's Christendom? Okay, let's get in our DeLorean and go back in time. All right, so Christianity was founded with what? When was Christianity founded? Anyone know? Pretty easy answer. At the incarnation. When Jesus was born into the world, roughly at Christmas. That's when Christianity began. I am not saying that Christianity is dead. I'm saying far from that. But I'm saying Christendom is dead. So, after our Lord came into this world, he suffered and died, rose again. And so, after Pentecost, the people of the church were sent out. The early Christians were sent. And they brought the gospel to all these places. How was it received at first? Not well. It wasn't received well. In fact, the early Christians were persecuted. But nonetheless, souls were converted. When Paul went to Corinth, Thessalonica, Galatia, what happened? He established the Christian faith. Were the people necessarily open at first? No. But he was doing something that was capturing their hearts. Now, there was lots of pushback, don't get me wrong. But nonetheless, they made an impact. Peter took the church to Rome. Was it well received? No. It was actually forbidden. In fact, what did they used to do to the early Christians? Those of you who've been to Rome and perhaps been to the Roman Colosseum, what does tradition have that was done there? They would take the Christians, throw them to the lions, and people would watch it as a form of entertainment. Persecution of Christians, okay? And so, let's flash forward just a few centuries. Let's go to the beginning of the 4th century, okay? Christianity was legalized in the Roman Empire. That was huge. That means so much progress has been made in the church in converting souls that Christianity was legalized. And then something unbelievable happened in the year 337 AD. Constantine, the emperor of the Roman Empire, converted to Christianity. And so we saw the beginnings of a Christian society. When I say Christendom, it refers to a time in which, or a place in which all of society is Christian, in which the faith permeates the family, the society, the government, the way of living. It just is. It's a Christian culture. And starting after the conversion of Constantine, we see that. And we see the church and Christianity gaining influence. Quite a bit, actually. To the point that on Christmas Day, mind you, the year 800, something unbelievable happened. The Pope crowned Charlemagne emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. on Christmas Day. So the church went from being thrown to the lions to being the one who was making emperors. And so the geopolitical might, the social and economic, political and diplomatic, cultural and intellectual might of the church was huge. The church was European, the church was Western, and the church had an unbelievable influence. But I ask you, was that how it was supposed to be? Let's flash forward to our modern time. Okay? We live in a society now that is no longer Christian. It's not. I'm under no delusion of the fact that we live in a Christian culture. No longer is the faith picked up by osmosis. No longer do people pick up the faith like the language. People just aren't born into the society and suddenly they just know what to do. It's not like a sponge in water. There was a time when you were born into a culture and like a sponge in water, you just picked up a Christian identity. It's not like that anymore. My personal opinion, my personal musings, is that the death of Christendom happened between the First and the Second World War. That was the beginning of the dismantlement of the old kingdom, the old world. And now it's taken about 100 years to bleed dry. But Christendom, not Christianity, Christendom is over. I'm under no delusion of what the society we live in. And like I said, this brings me personally a whole lot of peace because it means my mission as a priest has changed. A lot of us think we need to save the culture. No. It needs to die. It's too late. We are not called to save the culture. It's like on Good Friday. You look at what you did. It's like being on Good Friday and trying to take the nails out of Jesus' hands once you realize what you've done. It's too late. He has to die. But praise be to God that we are Christian people. Because going back to that Good Friday, what happens 3 days later? What happens? There's a resurrection. And this is the fundamental key. We are not called to save the culture. We are called to resurrect the culture. This is vastly different because it means certain things of a bygone society in some ways may not come back. I can't promise you that the church is going to build cathedrals out of stones that are all over Europe. I can't tell you that that's going to be our future. The future of the church is going to look different. And I ask you, was Christendom really what our Lord even asked of us? Because you see, if we want a church that is full of influence, power, dominion, that permeates the entire society, and one of grandeur, I ask of you, to what extent and in what ways have we fallen into the same trap that those who tried to capture our Lord did? Things must look different. No longer do we live in a Christian society. But the hardest part of this is that there's so many of you here that are old enough to remember the very last elements of a Christendom society. You remember a time when people just knew how to act, when people were just faithful. They may not necessarily know all the details, but Christianity, the faith, the church permeated society. The church was just not a spiritual hub. People would come here as a source of community, as a source of entertainment, as a source of education. Christianity had its hands in everything. For centuries, the church was one of the biggest promoters of healthcare and education in the world. I can't tell you that's the case anymore. But you remember that. And so you're mourning a loss of something. And so there's that temptation to be mad at something that you're trying to save. But I ask you, do not get angry. Do not get frustrated. Because to what extent and in what ways was it meant to last to begin with? Does not our Lord make it abundantly clear that my kingdom's not of this world? And so things are going to look different. And so what does a resurrection of the faith look like? Well, it's not going to be telling people, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. It may be true, but they're not going to listen to you. Why? Because they don't care. They don't. Just because somebody has a rosary wrapped around the rearview mirror doesn't necessarily mean that they actually believe in God. And so how are we going to resurrect the faith? You're going to have to share your faith. You're going to have to talk to strangers. You're going to have to go have meals with people. And you're going to have to tell people how Jesus Christ has fundamentally changed your life. You have to tell people about the inner workings of your own personal soul, what your prayer life is like, your own recovery from sin, your own overcoming of evil in your life, and knowing what it's like to actually be saved. And when you have that intimacy in these conversations, this is where the faith is going to be spread. And this brings us back to the New Testament. We have more in common now with St. Paul in the first century than we do with the last 100 years. Paul went to places where he was persecuted. They didn't like what they had to hear, but for whatever reason, people heard it. They were willing to listen. And he changed people's souls by preaching not a God of a physical kingdom, not a power of might, but a power that will last for eternity. The church of the future is going to be built of living stones, not stones that will one day crumble with time. It will be built of stones that will last for eternity. And so I ask you, are you willing to share your faith with people so that when they hear your struggles, they see how God has made manifest in your life, and they hear these stories in the midst of a crumbling world, they're going to tell themselves, I want that. And that's how the future of the faith will go from here. No longer are we in a Christendom society. We are back in an apostolic church. And praise be to God, because the gospel and the New Testament tells us exactly what to do. It's been done before, and we can do it again. And so we should be of no surprise when we wake up and we realize that our Lord's kingdom is not of this world.